Greetings, programs, and welcome to the Not My Star Wars live stream. Thank you very much for joining me today with my special guest. I want to give you guys a couple quick notes. First of all, open invite. Talk. Just be respectful, be mature, have a nice conversation. If you're a Disney fan, you can come on. I'm not going to cuss you out or yell at you, but you must be respectful. The only other requirement is that you have a YouTube, a blog, SoundCloud, something so that I can see your tone. Outside of that, you're very welcome to reach out to me at notmystarwars1977@gmail. Okay, a few quick notes for you guys. Comments. Please be kind. Please be respectful. Mr. Rinzler has 2 daughters. He has family, friends, colleagues. There also may be someone from Lucasfilm or Disney listening. So writing rude comments, saying nasty things isn't going to get you anywhere with any of us, and it'll get you kicked out. So please be respectful. Enjoy your time here. Real quick, thank you, Stephanie and Tommy, for coming by and for moderating. Mr. Rinzler has an NDA with Disney. There are certain things that he will not be able to answer. I have a multitude of questions. We will get to what we can. Most of this will be focused on George Lucas era. I do have Disney questions. We will try to get to them. Just know that he cannot answer all of the questions. I will do my best to get what I can out of him. But we have agreed that just to keep things moving, he may just say pass on some of the things, just to keep things moving. Do not think he's being rude or doesn't want to answer. It's just some things he cannot say. I will do my best. Basically, the last thing that I want to mention is that Jonathan is here on his own volition. I only met him a week ago. He doesn't owe me any favors. He's not endorsing me. He's not expressing any opinion. He's being very gracious to give us some time to talk about Star Wars and his experiences at Lucasfilm. So while I'm very thankful, I want to make it clear that he's not here with any expressed opinion or any kind of leaning. He's here on his own. He has his own opinions, and he will address things on his own. It has nothing to do with my influence. He has just been very gracious to come on. Okay, guys. So with all of that said, born in Lakewood, New Jersey, Jonathan Rinzler grew up in New York City and Berkeley. He is married, has 2 adult daughters, and lives on the Northern California coast. Author of over 20 books, 3 New York Times bestsellers, and a London Times bestseller, including The Making of Star Wars, The Complete Making of Indiana Jones, and the #1 best-selling graphic novel, The Star Wars. His books have been translated into 7 languages, with more than 600,000 copies in print. A prolific writer who was Lucas Licensing's book division executive editor until 2016. Following the announcement of the Star Wars Canon reboot into Star Wars Legends in April of 2014, a new edition of the Star Wars by Rinzler was published on May 7th. He has also written The Making of Planet of the Apes 2018, The Making of Alien 2019, and The Making of Aliens, coming out in September 2020. His most recent books are The Making of Return of the Jedi and Star Wars Storyboards, the original trilogy. In March 2014, J.W. Rinzler wrote Star Wars, The Clone Wars Episodes, The Disappeared Part 1 and The Disappeared Part 2. His first novel, All Up, is due out in early July 2020, right about now. The villain Rinzler in Tron Legacy was named after Jonathan. So it gives me great pleasure. Please, everyone, welcome him. Shoot a hello there in the comments, and be sure to like the stream, share it out. Jonathan, thank you for joining us.
Hello. I think that was the longest intro ever. Very nice. Thank you.
Good. I hope it was accurate. I hope it was a good right on. And You can hear okay? Everything's okay?
The sound cut out a little bit during the intro, but 90% good.
Okay, great. Well, I have you for, he says, an hour, maybe an hour and a half. I'm going to get what I can out of him. Let's see what happens. But at least we have him for a good hour. So let's get right to it. And let's try to have a good time. You have a lot of fans here, and there will be plenty more stopping in, I'm sure. Okay, so the first most basic question. What was your first experience with Star Wars?
My first experience was in 1977. I was able to go with my mother and my brother, who's younger than me, to see a sneak preview of Star Wars. We got, it's a long story, but we had tickets, and my sort of stepfather was a manager at a radio station. He's the one who got the tickets, and we didn't want to go because we said, "What kind of movie is it?" And they said, "Oh, I think it's science fiction." And I'd recently been taken to see, and I can't remember it, the Russian sci-fi movie that they remade a few years ago. I can't remember it. It was very long and totally incomprehensible to a whatever I was, 13, 14-year-old. So I thought, oh my God, this is going to be awful. But we were dragged to go see it. And it was I believe it was at the Coronet Theater in San Francisco. And my brother remembers that the theater was packed. As soon as we were there, you could feel there must have been people there who had felt some buzz or heard about it or something. And because there was a lot of excitement in the air. My brother remembers George Lucas standing up and taking a bow. I don't remember that, but what the hell? We'll throw that in there and say it happened. And then, of course, there was obviously I knew nothing about the film, and it started a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Was such an intriguing opening, and then, of course, the famous opening shot. And the crowd just went insane. It was the most exciting time in the cinema, I think, ever. There are a few that are runners up, but I think it has to take the cake. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah, it was pretty magical how people reacted in the theaters and to those movies. I mean, my experience was, everybody cheering and clapping and hooting and hollering. I've never seen anything like it. Well, I was very little in 77, but I did see Star Wars in 77, and never seen anything like it again. Totally different now. Movie theaters are empty for the new ones, just so you know. Like literally, I went to see The Rise of Skywalker. There was 8 people in the theater, and I was one of them.
How
opening day?
No kidding.
I could show you the pictures.
Wow.
Yeah. It's Star Wars has fallen. Anyways, we'll get more into that later. So I'm sorry if did you mention your age? How old were you?
Well, let's see. I was about 14.
Okay. Yeah, I was 3. I don't remember everything, but I remember the big Star Wars, and it faded back, and the scroll and the music, and just, what an impression. So how did you feel? How did it impact your life when you came out of that movie?
Well, I must have looked things up, or maybe I figured it out later, but I've seen American Graffiti. And American Graffiti had actually had as big impact on my life as I was probably 10 when I saw American Graffiti, 10 or 11. And I went out and got the soundtrack, and it opened my life up to that whole era of music, and which was big. And this idea of nostalgia. And then Star Wars, my brother came home. He immediately started drawing a comic book, redrawing what happened in the film. I think we bought the comic book, I think, and I spent a lot of time trying to add. Later on, I got whatever it was, this 8mm film that you could get that had the TIE fighter attack, and I remember trying to attach sound to it, which didn't go very well. So, you're trying to recreate the experience, basically. That's what we were both trying to do.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was something that you wanted to relive. And of course, so that's why the very early merchandise sold so well. I mean, it kept on selling, but it was just one of those things. You wanted to relive it. You wanted to go see it again. Um, it was like nothing that you'd seen before. So it had a big effect.
Oh yeah, and I think you probably sense, like I did, you're never going to see anything like it. Now, granted, not George did it amazing with the other movies as well, and he obviously captured that magic because it was George. But just you knew when you came out that it was like, wow, I've never seen this, and I don't think I'm ever going to see anything on this scale. And I had the same experience. We had the toys, and or at least I did. Many other kids did that I knew, but I was uh, the only child. So, and yeah, it was always trying to relive this stuff. We played with those toys endlessly. And I don't know. I don't feel like nowadays kids care or go through that same magic. It's a shame. But it was very special, yes. So I know that you saw The Force Awakens. As a contrast, how did you feel when you came out of that film?
Well, how did I feel? You know, it was very complicated for me at the time because I lived all the whatever it was 2 or 3 years leading up to it, and went to dozens of meetings about it, and worked on a lot of product related to it, and and actually at the time I actually saw it was already I was working on the making of that film. Uh, and as you know, that book was ultimately canceled. But at the time when I saw it, I was working on it, so I was really trying to like it, and I think that J.J. Abrams did. There were some things in it that were very funny. There was some very witty dialogue. Lawrence Kasdan was writing it, or half of it, or whatever. They were co-wrote it, and then of course there was Michael Arndt as well. I don't know how much of his stuff was actually in there, because I didn't get to see. I don't think I. Well, at some point I read a script, but I can't remember which script I read. But anyway, I really wanted to like it, but it it just didn't have and it couldn't have, and I didn't expect it to have George Lucas's touch. What makes Star Wars, all six of the original films, so special. I mean, part of what makes them so special, it's their expression of George Lucas's character, and his vision and his idea of what a good, inspirational, entertaining film can be or is. So, it couldn't possibly be the same. But I at the time I thought, well, uh, did what they did. I personally did not like at all killing off Han Solo, and I've said that elsewhere. That was not my. I was not happy. Just personally speaking, I was not happy with that at all. It seemed like character-wise, it just didn't make any sense to me at all. How could Han Solo and Princess Leia have the most that what looked like a, if not the most evil, a fairly evil son. What happened if you're going to do something like that character wise? It seems to me that you have to have some kind of backstory, some kind of explanation, and the first, and then he kills him. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he kills him the first time they meet, and
Well, yeah, they hadn't seen each other in a while, and yeah,
yeah, in the
absolutely.
movie the first time they meet,
Yeah.
and also I'm not a fan of the way um, some movies, let's say, just because they replicate the way another film did something, they think somehow that's going to make their scene that much more interesting. It doesn't. To me, it makes it really. I find it really disturbing because I think, well, I'm now watching a different movie. I'm watching something that looks like a movie I've already seen, but which is not the movie I've already seen. So there's a little bit of a. It's like that movie, the Artist, that came out and actually won the Academy Award for Best Picture, which was to me one of the most ridiculous decisions the Academy members ever made. I don't know if you saw that movie, The Artist. It's a silent movie.
I don't recall, to be honest with you.
It was a French silent movie, and about the last 20 minutes of it just took the music from Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, Bernard Herrmann's famous score. Suddenly it's Vertigo. What is going on here? So I had that, and it sort of gives you vertigo because it's the music from a film that you know really well suddenly in this other movie. And that's the way it kind of felt at times with The Force Awakens. Like, this is not just because you quote another movie or you bring something. I think it's gotten to a disturbing level in a lot of movies. I can understand the homage. I think Quentin Tarantino does homages really well, where, as they say, men of talent borrow and geniuses steal. When you steal it, you understand what the source material, where it came from or what it means at a deeper level, and you can make it your own in a way. Whereas men of talent are just aping without understanding why they're doing it.
No, I agree. That was one of the biggest complaints for everybody with The Force Awakens, is it was just A New Hope again. It was a rehash of A New Hope. A poor one, but it was a New Hope remake. And Han, they made him a deadbeat dad. It's Ben Skywalker, and they made Ben Solo. I mean, it's just all over the place.
And I understood that I was not the target audience, and it's just it was the way things go. And I also figure, as I still do now, franchises have their ups and downs. I've seen James Bond films since I was a kid. They've gone up and down. Some people love one actor, other people love the other.
Mm-hmm.
Who's
your favorite Bond?
Like well, for me, hands down, Sean Connery.
Okay. I'm a Roger Moore guy. I love Sean, but I'm a Roger Moore guy.
Well, I loved Live and Let Die. I really loved Live and Let Die. I was the perfect age for that. But still, Sean Connery, for me, was the coolest and the most perfect expression of James Bond. But, everybody's got their favorites. And I know there's people who love they've told me that X, Y, or Z Disney Star Wars movie is their favorite, and they like it better than all the other ones. And you can't tell somebody you can't like it, because
and none of us ever do. That's something what we were talking about a minute ago, but in the backstage, the group that's in here, I don't know everybody that's in here, but I can promise you the group that's in here and myself, we never say you cannot like the new movies. We never call them dumb or any of that. Where we have an issue is when they say it's canon and it's Star Wars and you just need to accept it and shut up. That's what they do to us. And it's like, are you sure you guys watched the first 6 movies? Because
I had all sorts of, I had a long talk with Brad Bird, the director of Incredibles, etc. And he said to me, and I said, yeah, I've seen the same thing as, adults get red in the face. And this was before all the sequels, about whether the prequel films are okay or not, or whether, what happened. And people have really strong opinions. And as we know, the prequels were lambasted by a small but very vocal group as well. And I was always defending the prequels, and I will defend the prequels. I mean, I thought 2 and 3 weren't that great, but they each had some really great moments. But I really liked episode 1, and I couldn't, and I know right now it's probably freaking people out that I'm saying that even, but I couldn't understand the backlash against episode 1, and I think as time goes on, it'll be vindicated as a much better film than people took it for when it first came out.
Yeah, well, that's one thing the sequels have done, is given people a new appreciation for the prequels. I always loved the prequels. Again, I don't understand people that hate them so much. They weren't perfect. They weren't the best films ever, but they're part of the story. There's continuity. They continue the story of everyone. They elaborate on everything, beautiful worlds and ships and characters, costumes, music. I love them. Clones is my favorite.
Yeah. Clone
Phantom
Wars.
Menace. Phantom Menace was probably my least favorite, but I love Phantom Menace. The pod races, Maul, young Anakin. I had no problem with any of that. Jar Jar. I like all that stuff.
Yeah. So, it's very rare to get three people in a room and have them agree on any one film, no matter what film it is.
Yeah.
It-
And it's okay. We all have certain parts we love about it. I'm a big Boba Fett guy, so this probably makes me a little partial to Attack of the Clones. I also love the scale, that massive battlefield with all that, like literally a million things on the screen. I just love it. So
yeah. And I love the asteroid chase in the episode 2.
Oh, absolutely, love
And
that.
the sound design. I mean, you had Ben Burtt doing the sound design and the editing. You had George Lucas doing the writing and directing. You had ILM doing the visual effects. I mean, you still do have some of those people still working on the films, but for the prequels, an enormous roster of extremely talented, between talented to genius working on the film. John
Yeah,
Williams doing the music. So those are special movies.
they were very special. Absolutely. I know that for everyone in this chat, and obviously for the two of us, they were very special. It was a very special time for cinema, for the world. Just real quick, and I know you know this, you obviously have to know this, but maybe not everybody realizes that's asteroid scene part of because I've heard you talking about how things reflect in Star Wars. Um, just briefly, they chase Obi-Wan, they shoot the final rocket, and it blows up, and Obi-Wan blips off the radar. Then they show Obi-Wan on the side of the asteroid. That was made as a direct reflection to Empire when Han is on the side, stuck on the side of the Star Destroyer, and the trash goes, and then he detaches, and Boba Fett follows him. So that's where Boba Fett gets it from. He learned that lesson from what Obi-Wan did there. Not everybody knows that, so just a little fun fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome stuff. George was so brilliant. Sometimes I hear people, they say, I love Star Wars, but George was an idiot. He doesn't know how to direct. He doesn't know anything. And I'm like, you can't really have one without the other. He's not a god. You don't have to praise him, but how can you say you love Star Wars but hate George Lucas? I mean, this is the mentality of these people, and I don't know. Whatever. To each his own. I just don't understand.
On any number of subjects, you will occasionally people say things and they don't really hear the words coming out of their own mouth.
No, absolutely. It
happens. I think it's happened to me a few times.
Oh, it happens to me a lot.
Yeah, so you want to try and maybe rewind a bit and say, let me amend that. But obviously, I spent a lot of time with George over the years, and I've met who I think are a few geniuses in my life, and he certainly was one of them.
No, I agree. Does he know everything? Is he perfect at everything? For all I know, he can't tie his shoes, but he certainly knows how to make a space opera. So,
yeah, and the thing about George is he's extremely focused. That focus count. I mean, it's not the only aspect of a genius, but I was impressed with his ability to focus. I mean, and compartmentalize. Sometimes I knew that there were problems in other aspects of the film, and then we'd sit down in animatics while we're doing episode 3. I mean, he was doing it. I was sitting there chronicling what he did, and he'd either sit there for 2 hours working on one shot of the animatics, the opening waterfalls shot or the asteroid chase or whatever it was, the visual effects, and he was so focused and so relaxed too at the same time. It was really something to observe.
I'm sure you were very lucky to have experienced that. A lot of us would kill to have those moments. I think, there was a lot of things. He had a lot of help. He was very smart. He created it, so he knew what was supposed to happen and how. But I think the overall biggest factors, he truly believed in and loved those movies and what he was doing, the story he was telling. And I think that's the greatest divide with Disney and Lucas is one loved it and lived it. The other one's just trying to manufacture money, and it shows. It shows terribly. Okay, so I read somewhere that your favorite character is Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I mean, certainly of the original trilogy. I mean, he's not in the prequels, but yeah, and that's why I put. Also, I think Mark Hamill. I think he's getting maybe more credit lately, but I kind of felt like he was an unsung hero of at least of the cast of the original trilogy, and that's why he's on the cover of each book. I just thought he was the anchor. He was the center of it. I think it's a beautifully written character, and I just love his performance. I think he did a fantastic job. He's really on the same wavelength as George. You know, early on, as you sure you know, at a certain point he realized he was playing George to some extent. You know, his name is Luke, and
Mm-hmm.
and so it was just a wonderful. I think they had a wonderful meeting of the minds. I don't think it was conscious, or it was semi-conscious, and it really. Mark Hamill understood where George was coming from, and it really helped the first three films.
No, I agree. Mark was great. The younger crowd doesn't understand that, yes, the overall story is about Anakin, but at first it was Luke. It was Luke's journey. He's the hero. If it wasn't for Luke Skywalker, none of us would be here. Those prequels would not have been made. Um, it's again about Anakin, but it's very much about Luke, you know? So,
Yeah, I you know, and people watch the movies in different order. George has said, I think now he always says you have to watch them 1 through 6, but that's not what he said on the set of Episode 3. And I've said this a few times. Episode 3, he said you could watch them in different orders and they tell a different story. I know some people watch them 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6, whatever you want to do is fine. If I were to watch them, I'd watch them 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3.
yeah, I probably would as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or what? Or 1 through 6. I don't like to jump around, but
yeah. I mean, to me, there's the means by which they made the film, and I think it's be disconcerting for me personally to see the visual effects kind of, you know, the means become more primitive suddenly in the middle of the saga. But you know, everybody does what they have to do to make themselves happy.
yeah. Um, okay, so you came into Lucasfilm in 2001 in the middle of Attack of the Clones. So I'm curious, what did you see? Where were they in the film? What, like, literally, you walk in and what scene are you seeing? Where are they at in the story? What was going on?
They had already completed the shooting. They were in the editing, and my first day there, I was given a VHS cassette copy and just put in a room and with a little TV and a player, and I just watched the rough cut, which was a really cool thing to do your first day at work,
Mhm.
and uh, and
Nice.
you know, the battle between Yoda and Count Dooku was a source of concern because that wasn't really in any good shape, and Rob Coleman, the animation director, told me he was a little worried about it. So that's where they were, and then we were working on the making of Episode 2 book. I wasn't writing that one. I was the editor because I was the nonfiction editor, and I wanted to add. I can't remember how it happened, but we decided to add a side, you know, thing about ILM and the dailies. And so Rick, the producer, Rick McCallum, said I could come to the dailies twice a week moving forward. So that was so I got on sort of the inside track there, and so it was really amazing to sit there in a room with the visual effects heads of department and supervisors and George making comments as they developed these shots. So that's that was sort of that's what was happening the first few months I was there, plus a bunch of other things. You know,
Well,
we
yeah,
were
I'm
working
sure.
on books, a lot of books. We started the Boba Fett series, the YA Boba Fett series, which eventually Elizabeth Hand wrote most of those, and and there were, a lot of other things were happening. It was very exciting.
Well, it's ironic that you mentioned Boba Fett. Boba Fett is my favorite character of all time, of any media, comics, movies, anything. And I do have a few Boba Fett questions for you. You can see here. Couple quick questions. I have heard Lucas say that had he known people would have cared so much about Boba Fett, he would have gave him a more exciting or glorious death. So it is my understanding that the big reason why he made the clones Boba Fett's was to give us a shout back at kind of a I'm sorry for killing Boba Fett. And is there any truth to that? Did he mention that this is why Boba Fett is the clone, or was it just
because I came in the middle, I wasn't there as they were sounding it out, and I wasn't there. Didn't get to talk to him about the script. Didn't write that book. I didn't really. I couldn't say yes or no. I mean, it's possible.
Okay? That's how I always interpreted it, because he has said, hey, I would have done more with him.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Okay, and have you ever heard out of George's mouth or on any kind of notes, official notes, that Boba Fett is not a Mandalorian?
Is not a Mandalorian? That I don't know. I never heard one way or the other. No.
Okay, because in the Clone Wars cartoon, they now are claiming that Jango wasn't a Mandalorian, therefore Boba can't be. The whole reason we know what Mandalorians are is Boba Fett and the mythosaur on his suit, so it drives a lot of us crazy. I would love to ask George one day if that's true. Dave Filoni claims that that's what George said to him, but if I don't hear from George, I'm not going to trust it. I think it's pretty crazy. Why would he do that? But
I don't know. If Dave Filoni says it, I work with Dave quite a bit on certain projects. I would trust him.
Okay. Well, that's what he says. He says that George told him he doesn't want him to be a Mandalorian. I don't see the logic there, but okay. On Maz Kanata's castle in The Force Awakens, I don't know if you recall, there was a giant mythosaur, the big Mandalorian symbol on the front of that castle. Do you recall that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
You're getting into stuff that, it's more. I guess I don't know the trees and not the forest. I was never a fan in that sense of the word. I have huge respect for fans because they actually know a lot more than I do about all this stuff, to be quite honest. When I was interviewed for the job to begin with, they asked me what I thought of the expanded universe, and I didn't know what they were talking about. I just know the films and the stuff that I worked on. And I do know a lot of trivia about some stuff because I worked on it, but now you're getting into areas that I don't know about.
Okay, no, I just thought I'd ask because these are things that the guys inside would know. I think it's just fan service. There was no meaning to it, but I didn't know if there was any. Two more Boba Fett questions, and we'll keep going. Boba Fett, and I'm sure you know this, it was always on StarWars.com. George Lucas said it. Darth Vader said it in the holiday special, the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. Did you at any time hear George Lucas or see any paperwork, hear anybody say that had changed? Has another bounty hunter been considered better? Was Boba Fett in any way demoted, or as far as you know, is he still the best bounty hunter in the galaxy?
I never, to be honest, I never heard that he was the best, and I never heard he was not the best.
Okay, it used to be all over StarWars.com, and again, it was in the holiday special. Darth Vader says it, and it was in tons of literature.
If it was all over StarWars.com, at the time I would not doubt it.
Okay, no worries. And then my last question on Boba Fett is, did you know anything about the movie? Can you tell us anything about the movie that was at least talked about in the works for Boba Fett?
I did know that would definitely be an NDA thing, but I really didn't. I don't know even if they were considering it. I can't be of much help there.
Okay. All right. So keep in mind these following questions are George Lucasfilm, not Disney stuff. So what was a day in the life for Jonathan Rinzler at Lucasfilm?
What
What
was
was
the
your
day in life like?
Yeah, like what did you go in and do? Did you clock in and then what happened? What was your typical day?
Well, there's no clocking in, but you know, it was a corporation. I always say it was a really nice. They were really the employees were treated really really well. You know, and they were we were in different places. I was Skywalker Ranch in the beginning, and then there was ILM, which is down in the industrial zone in San Rafael. LucasArts had its own building near the freeway. Skywalker Sound was on Sky at Skywalker Ranch in the tech building, which is also called Skywalker Sound, which is this incredible building. So you know, it depends where I was, but in the beginning, a normal day was just you'd go in and there's always a certain horrible amount of emails you'd have to do. You're always working on around 20 books or so. And then,
Wow.
you know, I was working on the making of Revenge of the Sith. On any given day, I might have to take these, they were like secret stairways so you could go down in the building so that people wouldn't see you. Not that they were meant to be secret, they were meant to be made staircases like they built in 19th century houses, but they were these sort of back doors so you could kind of get out of one building and into the other building because I wasn't supposed to be known that I was going to these episode 3 meetings. So on, you know, whatever it was, definitely Fridays. Also in the beginning, George Lucas was starting his own line of books. They were called George Lucas Books, and he did a book called Cinema by the Bay, and another book about death, and another book about the movie business. And I was working with my boss, Lucy Wilson, on those, so could be meeting about that. There weren't too many meetings, but what was nice about Lucasfilm was every day was not the same. There was, you know, you would do things. You go to New York to meet with publishers. Early on, there was this whole thing where George was doing his kind of director's cut of THX 1138 while he was doing episode 3. So because they could see I was balding, I was asked if I wanted to be an extra in his director's cut. So me and about 11 other guys got our heads shaved and spent a day at ILM with George directing us in these scenes that he wanted to add. He needed crowd extras or people sitting at desks, and it was all very high tech. And so, you know, and then there was stuff leading up to that, and then there was things after that with them designing the cars that were going through THX. And then there was, you know, international licensees that would come by. It was just a really exciting place to work, and every week it would seem there was something, you know, more or less extraordinary happening. Up till about, well, I'd say up till it was very intense up till about 2008 when Indiana Jones came out. But then the Clone Wars were going fairly big, and George wanted to work on a bunch of books like Star Wars Frames and all these Star Wars art books, some of which required years of work. So it was very intense. It was just very gratifying, and there was a fair amount of stress involved. And I thought I was fired 2 or 3 times for one reason or another. And so, you know, it wasn't like a picnic, but it was a really, I would have probably, you know, if George hadn't sold the company, I'd probably, you know, almost definitely still be working there.
So that's nice to hear that they treated you well. They treated the people there well. Because you hear all kinds of stuff. Not that I thought it was not treated well, but you hear all kinds of stuff from the outside. It's nice to hear that you know, they respected their employees and that you guys had opportunities to have fun and
Yeah.
create.
You know, people will always complain. Again, I couldn't understand why they were complaining about working there.
Right. I can't imagine.
You know, everybody's job was different, but still, a lot of people had a lot of very interesting jobs, and so I thought it was you know, it was a corporation. There were corporate things going on. You know, there were if you looked for things to complain about, you could find them. but I thought it was a great place to work.
Very cool. What was your favorite project that you worked on throughout the Lucas era?
Now, that's a hard one. That's like asking to choose which child is your favorite.
Wow.
I don't think I can choose. There were so many great projects. Episode 3 was probably just the most mind-boggling. I got to see so many things while chronicling the film. But working with George for 5 years in Star Wars frames, him and Mike Blanchard for hours. Well, he chose the frames was kind of an interesting, surreal experience. And then, he was kind of, he wanted to divide the shots that he chose into categories. So working with him on that was very interesting. And then that was the first big book that he was kind of hands-on doing. So, once or twice I was mentoring George, and how bizarre was that? And George was always pushing the envelope, so it was also nerve-wracking too, because we weren't sure at all that we could pull off that book. So that was an amazing experience, and there were just lots of great experiences, and a lot of great people too. I mean, meeting and Hank, being able to get to know John Knoll and Dennis Murrin and Ben Burt, those were amazing experiences.
Very cool. We all can learn from each other, so I'm happy to have heard that from you. Which I was going to ask you this later, but I guess I'll go ahead and ask you. On the outside, one of the things that I hear about people that hate the prequels always say is that everybody was a yes man. Nobody challenged George. Nobody said, hey, no, or don't do that, or you should think about that. Everybody was just like, yes, George, whatever you say, George. And I just don't want to believe that. I want to believe that people challenged him, that questioned things, that said, hey, think about that. Was he open to input, or was he very rigid? Like, nope, this is what it's going to be. What was your experience there?
Well, I think anybody who's directing movies is more or less convinced that their way is the best way most of the time. They don't get to be a director of the movie because they waffle, or they sit there taking votes about what's going to be the best way to do something. They're generally speaking fairly autocratic personalities, but and then there's a spectrum of more or less collaboration, and I don't think you can survive as a director without also collaborating. So early on, George was, even with THX, he had a vision for what he wants the movie to be, and then within that vision, he has to take on certain realities about what he can do, what he can't do in terms of many things, mostly money, but also, early on, what can the visual effects do and what can't they do? So at that level, he was always collaborating and having to compromise and things like that. And I don't think that really changed that much for the prequels. I wasn't in every conversation, but I know that Rick challenged him at least a few times, and I know that other people did. And it's not like it was like a big argument, but it was like, well, what if we did it this way?
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, he was at least open to some input, I would think. He wasn't just like, no, that's it. I would think, that's my assumption, is that he would at least,
right,
from some people, take some input. Doesn't mean that at the end of the day they were going to get their way, but people really painted like everybody was just a yes man, nobody could speak, and he just made all the decisions, and they were all terrible. And when Lucasfilm, THX, Skywalker Ranch, all of this is a big conglomeration. If Star Wars is a hit, it's everybody. But if things fail, it's also everybody. It's not just George. The editors and the sound and all these things. So I don't know. People really like attack him and say that nope, he didn't want to hear nothing, and I just find that hard to believe. That's why I asked.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, it is ultimately George who's responsible for the quality of the
well, yeah, sure, of course.
He is the one. He's also paying for it, which is not
Yeah, right.
That really gave him a lot more clout, and
Sure.
but everything went through his filter. But I saw things. He was definitely collaborative when they were shooting Padme's funeral. He was working with the DP about what would be an interesting way of shooting that uh, with David Tattersall, and I know from work doing the books, those were collaborative experiences without a doubt. I in that case it was just usually me and him deciding how to do things. He was very open to ideas and would joke around and in frames Mike could say, Mike had opinions as well. It was definitely not like shut up and I'm the boss. And I mean, the one difference, of course, between the original trilogy and the prequels is the presence of Marsha Lucas, uh, and I don't think that's that's a given. She was his wife, so therefore she had
Oh, yeah.
an opinion about things, and I'm sure he listened to her. But what I often say is, you have to look at what the other people do on their own. And some of the people that worked on the original trilogy went on to make their own movies, and some didn't. Uh, George went on to make the prequels and produce a fair number of films. I mean, clearly he is a filmmaker. He's one of the great filmmakers of his generation. And Joe Johnston, I think, has to get a lot of credit too, because look what he's done after the original trilogy. And I think he had an influence on the original trilogy. He was right there, and George had a lot of confidence in him. And Joe was a creative personality to be reckoned with. And I think Rick once said to me that he thought Joe Johnston was a big part of why the original trilogy was so successful. But ultimately, it all comes down to George.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah. And I think that most of us understand it's a lot of people make this happen.
And
But
let's
at
not
the end of
forget
it,
John Williams, because
well, right, of course.
you
Absolutely.
take it for granted, but man,
No, I
without
don't.
John Williams, forget it.
I don't. The music was such a big part. That's on a quick side note. Since I was little, I would come out of the theater, even like episode 1 years later, I come out and I'm like dun 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 dun. And then you go see these new movies and it's like, I can't remember a single song. It doesn't touch you, it doesn't grab you. And that I'm a huge John Williams fan. When you actually listen, the music's beautiful. John Williams has not faltered a bit, but it doesn't grab you. And I don't think that it's John's fault. It's just what you're seeing and what you're hearing just doesn't mesh up, and you're just in such shock. And it just, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, because I haven't seen those films, but I tell you, one of the biggest thrills of my entire life was getting to interview him right before he started recording the soundtrack for episode 3. I just thought, I can't believe it. I mean, there's a guy who wrote Superman, Jaws, and Star Wars, and Raiders. I mean, and India. I mean, he is the one guy whose stature is almost, or whatever. You can't why debate it, but I remember George once, sometime, I don't know, I think maybe it was an editorial or something, and George just said, "Oh, this transition from scene to scene wasn't really perfect," but he said Johnny will make it work. I thought that was really cool.
No, Johnny was, is still amazing, and Ben, of course, all the sound effects, but also, they really understood not just the musical cues, but also the sound effect cues, not even just the obvious stuff, just the little nuances. Really amazing. George was really blessed because he had the best special effects, the best music, the best story, the best characters. I mean,
Right.
he made it happen, but
he made
was
it
also.
happen. People forget. It's not like those visual effects were just sitting around waiting for him.
Oh, no.
He
Yeah,
took a moribund, practically dead art. I mean, there were visual effects movies happening like Towering Inferno and other things, but take a look at what was in Logan's Run and compare it to Star Wars. I mean, he and then his lieutenants went out and got this hugely talented crew. You know, John Dykstra recruited a number of them, and other people, you know, friends recruited friends. Just an unbelievable group of people. And then, but you have to remember that George also just kept bankrolling them, I mean, it was the department that he kept going single-handedly. And, you know, he brought in his friends to work with them. I mean, it's an amazing, beautiful thing. And Lauren Peterson always refers to it being like Florence during Renaissance. And I think that's accurate. It was like a Renaissance there in Marin County. So many talented people working on so many great films. You know, not
Yes,
just
actually. No, yeah, I totally agree. It's really a phenomenon. Um, did George have any kind of ratings for the movies? I don't mean like literal, like Empire was a 4.5 stars. Did he ever indicate like an order of his favorites, or did he say, hey, this episode blank is my favorite?
uh, not for Star Wars. Once I was sitting with, it was when he was working on the THX director's cut, and it was just they started showing dailies after the episode 2 dailies, or was it the episode? No, it was episode 3 dailies, and well, maybe it's episode 2 dailies. I'm getting confused now. But anyway, we were sitting there at ILM, and they were showing THX dailies of the sort of new shots he was doing, and he just leaned back and said, "You know, this movie THX is closest to my I don't know if he said personality, but closest to who I really am, something like that." Because it's a very dark comedy. It's, you know, a lot of it is supposed to be funny, and it is funny, but only from somebody who's got a sense of humor similar to George's.
That's interesting. It doesn't totally shock me, but that's interesting. I've always liked THX 1138. Um, did George ever indicate a favorite character? Does he have a particular Star Wars character that he loves, or he loves them all, or?
I think people have asked him that, and I think he says he feels closest to Yoda. You know, it could change probably from one day to the next, but I've heard Yoda.
Cool. In general, would you say that George was friendly and sociable on the typical day, or was he more kind of recluse and quiet, or?
I think, like I said, he's really focused. So, uh, you know, I was told that he was shy, and I think really he's just focused, and he doesn't have, you know, one of the ILM folks who was there, you know, was working in '76 and worked on the original trilogy, first 2 films. Once overheard somebody trying to talk to George about sports, and George just looked at him and says, "I don't do sports. You know, we're not talking about sports." You know, and it kind of reminds me of Jerry Seinfeld. You know, he's often said he just wants to talk about to other comics about comedy. And I think George is like, he had his friends, they're filmmakers. They've been friends since the college days, and like those are his group of friends, and the people he's known for a long time, like Robert Dalva and Francis Ford Coppola, and those are his friends. And he's not stopping in the hall to talk with every employee who, you know, he crosses paths with. So he would never get anything done. And I think that was hard for some people to understand. And even the actors, I think it's definitely in the episode. Well, I think Anthony Daniels observed it a couple of times in a couple of the books, is that the actors would want things from him, and George just was busy. You know, he had other things to deal with. He wasn't going to sit there and hold actors' hands.
Right.
And so I found him to be very easy to be with. You just, you know, you just couldn't, you weren't going to, there wasn't going to be a lot of small chat, most likely. But occasionally there'd be long talks that would last for over an hour if he was in the mood. And often before an episode 3, there was a lot of, particularly towards the end, when he knew the movie was under control, and there was we'd be outside in the sort of courtyard at ILM, and there was a building C where the screening room was, and then there was the scoring stage, and then there was Jabba the Hutt, where you got coffee, and everybody gets like 10, 12 people. We'd all be there with our coffee, waiting for George to arrive and go in. And George would often come up and just, I think that's when he was his most relaxed, and just talk to people, and everybody, there was a really nice feeling. And the artists, I think also with the concept art group for episode 3, when he'd come up every Friday to look at the concept art, there was a really great feeling of collaboration there, because he'd tell the artists the week before what he wanted, and they would do this incredible artwork, and it'd be pinned to all the walls, and he'd come in, and there was just a really good vibe, and he would joke around, and the artists were just, Church and Eric Beeman and Alex Yeager and Robert Barnes and Warren Fu and the whole crew. They were just having a ball. They were just having a ball. This whole year they were working with him was just, it was just, everybody realized it was a unique opportunity. And George was enjoying himself too. I mean, he loves art. He loves, the whole fantasy, sci-fi, fantasy. I mean, he was having a good time. So yeah, I mean, he was a very, multi-layered person. Anyway, other times he, something really pissed him off. There were a couple times like that too.
We're all human.
Yeah.
From my memory, it was Java the Hutt, and I believe there was one in Texas as well. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Java the Hutt. There's the coffee store, the shop.
There's a picture in the episode 3 book, I think, but I don't know if you can see the name. And then eventually it moved to the Presidio. You could do, somebody out there can do a quick search on the internet and tell us.
How aware was George and Lucasfilm of the fans? Were you guys, like, I've heard you and others say that he would watch YouTube videos on the big screen and he would hear things, but were you guys like actively listening and looking at what the fans were saying, or was he kind of like, I'm going to do my thing and not try to focus too much on it? Did you have a team that was watching that stuff? How important was the chatter?
It was, I mean, I don't know, chatter, well, it was very important. There's no question that it was very important at various levels. And there were different departments looking at different things. I mean, I wasn't in the PR or marketing department, but we'd get together occasionally to talk about certain things. With the YouTube stuff, that was during the writers' conference, where we broke down the show for the episodes for the season 4 of the Clone Wars. And when I say big screen, it wasn't like we were in a theater. We were in a meeting room, and there was like a pull down screen from the ceiling, but it was, large screen. And it's not like we did it every day, but a few times during the 2 weeks. And George was laughing his head off. I don't know, I can't remember what we were watching, but they were fan films, and he loved the fan films. And that's why, I'm not sure whose decision it was, but to create the Fan Film Awards, that was a big way of getting behind fan stuff. And definitely the idea was, as long as people weren't selling product basically and trying to rip off the IP, that everything was fine, And I remember occasionally, once or twice, there'd be like some really outrageously hostile thing, and somebody would get really upset, and George would just be like, it's freedom of speech. Just let it go. Let's move on. But we were definitely aware of it. And one time, a kid, I think it was like a 8-year-old, wrote to George, because you could write to George at Skywalker, and he would read the stuff. And so it came to us, this child and the mother were upset because we'd done a Lego Star Wars book that made it sound like, with the Legos and the book, that you could build whatever it was, 8 different vehicles. And you could build 8 different vehicles, but not all at once. You only had a certain number of Lego. you could only build one vehicle at once, and there were 8 possible, but it wasn't really clear on the box. So I got this very tersely written note, basically saying, "Fix this," respond to this. And so I responded to the kid and his mother, and I basically sent a copy of my letter to George. He cared deeply about that stuff.
Glad to hear that. And I think a lot of us assume that he did. Did George ever mention Gray Jedi, and how did he feel about it?
About what?
Gray Jedi.
Gray Jedi?
There's a theory that goes around that there's Jedi that are in the middle that use both dark and light powers. Most of us say it's BS, but there's people that are hung up on it. And I was just curious if George ever said, no, that's not
I never
anything.
heard of that.
Okay. I knew the following answer pretty well, and I know pretty much what you're going to say because I've heard you in other interviews, but I want to throw it out there in this conversation. And before I do it, some people are not going to be happy about it, but the EU. Let me say that I love the EU. Mara Jade is one of my favorite characters of all time. I know you've spoken about her. But a lot of people are hung up on that it was canon, that it was that George was constantly reading all that stuff and looking over it. My understanding, my research, also things I've heard of you, George really didn't look at that stuff. He would approve things. He would oversee certain decisions. But and in fact, I have a quote that Mara Jade doesn't exist because Jedi don't get married. So just wanted to get from you a confirmation of how he felt on it, and basically, that what I just said, is that correct or no? That, in other words, it was somewhat canon, but a secondary or third layer of canon, not actual canon.
Well, when I was there, the idea was very simple. It was canon, but if George decided to do something in the Clone Wars that contradicted it, George had precedent, and then we would retrofit it so that it worked. George was definitely not involved in any kind of. He had bigger fish to fry than approving every story outline or comic book outline. Or I think he would be video games, because they cost much more money than making a book or a comic book. He would, I think, get briefed on and would have his say. And occasionally there'd be a question that would go up to licensing to him if it was something to do with Yoda, if we really thought it was important enough. But that was a rarity. But it was definitely it was definitely canon, and but not that he was paying that much attention to it. But he did he did look at the comic books. He's a long time comic book fan, long time. He had what was that store? Super Snipe with Ed Summers back in New York. It was one of the first comic book stores to have to show comic book art as a gallery. I mean, he was big into comic books. He'd play it down as he got older, but when he was younger, he was big into it. And I worked with George on Star Wars art comics, so I can testify firsthand that he had a love for comic book art, particularly comic book art that could tell the story sequentially with as few word balloons as possible. If it just told the story visually. So he would look at the comic books and he'd be inspired by stuff, and he'd incorporate famously, what's her name, and Ayla Secura into the films. That came from the comic books.
She's one of my favorites.
Yeah, so there was definitely some cross pollination. I think he liked some of the high end replicas, and when we did the DK chronology book, which he had nothing to do with it till it actually came out. But when it came out, he told me, he said he basically said, that's a good book. He wouldn't say great, but he said that it was a good book, because not only did you cover my work, but the work of my friends are in there, and he was happy. So it's not like he was ignoring stuff. He looked at everything. He didn't read every word by any stretch of the imagination, but he was looking at stuff. It was his company. And licensing was an extremely important aspect of that company because licensing was the cash cow besides the films. And in between film years, that's where the money was coming in through licensing.
So I just want to be sure that I heard you correctly. He did consider all of that stuff canon, except for when he would have to change something for the movies, then that would cause that section character part to become non-canon. But otherwise, it would be considered canon to him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think George thought about it. He didn't think, "Oh, this is canon." But yeah, there was no. We weren't operating in a way that would be something that George would disagree with. We were doing things that were canon, and when we wanted to do something that wasn't canon, like when I thought it would be a good idea for the episode 3 artists to write their own comic book stories, we knew that wasn't going to be canon. We named it Infinities. So there was Infinities.
Okay.
And then everything else was canon. That doesn't mean that, I don't know, that he disagrees with the fact that they decided it wasn't canon. I don't know. I have no idea if they ran that by him and he said whatever. I'm not privy to that information at all. But while I was there, and I can't remember when did they when did they decide it wasn't
2014 canon? When they made it Legends?
So I was still there, yeah. I don't remember anything coming from George that he cared one way or the other at that point, because at that point he no longer in the company.
Right. Okay. No, that's good to know. Again, I love the EU, and I would prefer that he considered it that way. I do have quotes where he says 1 through 6, the movies are the true ultimate canon. Sure. But it's nice to hear that he did heavily consider them as a genuine piece of the universe and not just extra media, a side story. And again,
that would be short thrifting the fans to be saying, "Oh, we're doing all this stuff, but none of it counts." Why would anybody care about it?
Right. No.
We'd be shooting ourselves in the face. It's like, "Oh, we're doing all this stuff, but none of it is actually true to the Star Wars universe." That would be insane.
Yeah, no, well, it's, again, from the outside, we hear different things and people interpret things. Yeah. And then there's some people that just say, no, it was just money. He just wanted to sell more books. Myself, like many, again, my deepest perception is that 1 through 6, the movies are the absolute. And then that all the other stuff is true to it and can be considered canon, just that, to an extent that the movies are going to override everything. That if something conflicts with the movies at all, then that's not canon. But otherwise, for the most part, and I'm sure you're very aware, the EU was pretty tidy. There were some stories that conflicted. There were some little things here and there, but for the most part, it was pretty good.
Well, we spent a lot of time, not me personally, I spent some time, but, as you know, Leland Shee, the keeper of the holocron, it was his job to make sure it all lined up. So we didn't have his job there because we didn't care. It's because the company as a whole cared that it all made sense. But, it doesn't mean that, in theory anyway, that George might have one day okayed it, just because at a certain point it becomes so dense and so complicated you can't do anything more. He might have okayed, saying, okay, we're rebooting the whole thing himself, but that's just, or he might not have. That's just speculation.
Have you paid any attention to the Disney canon, what they're doing with all this stuff?
No attention whatsoever.
Every comic book, every book, the movies, they all contradict.
Really?
Palpatine, I know I've heard you in other streams, comes back. There's like 3 different explanations. It's all over the place. It's all over the place. And they made it Legends because they said they wanted to put everything in order, and it's 10,000 times worse than what it was. It's a mess. It's a total mess.
I think I can say this without violating NDA. I have a huge amount of respect for Disney parks and Imagineering. I think they do a fantastic job. I can't wait to take my grandson one day to Disneyland. But aspects of the company are run in a way that is not conducive to creativity, let's say.
No, we can see it. It's very clear. It's not even like you have to be smart. I mean, it's painfully obvious. we'll keep moving, but real quick, about a week and a half ago, they declared Darth Plagueis non-canon. In Sith, Sidious says, "Do you know the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise?" So it's like, what are you doing, Disney? What are you doing?
Really?
It's in the movie, and you've now proclaimed him non-canon. They are just, I don't know what's going on at Disney Lucasfilm, but they have lost it.
Yeah, that does seem odd to me. I don't know why they did that, but it seems strange.
I could see if it was like a comic they contradict or a game, but literally they just said Darth Plagueis is not canon, and it's like,
That's well,
what are you doing?
that's kind of humorous.
Oh boy. The special editions, did you like them? I assume you're like me, you prefer the original films, but any quick comments on the special editions?
Yeah, my main position is George's films. He pays for them. He owns the negative. He can do whatever the heck he wants. It's his deal. And I know he was, for Star Wars in particular, there were a lot of things he wanted to do that he couldn't do. And being that kind of focused person that he is, he decided he was going to go do them when he had the chance. But yeah, I definitely prefer the theatrical versions of all the films, including Episode 1. I don't like the fact that the pod race was lengthened personally, but I'm just a sort of curmudgeon that way. That's what it was. That's what I personally liked a lot when I saw it on a big screen. And I think I think it's fine to have both versions exist. A lot of famous painters did two versions of the same subject. Why not have two versions of the same film? Why can't they just coexist?
No, and at the end of the day, I always respect George's vision, so I'm not angry. But and I'm referring more to the 4, 5, and 6 special editions.
Yeah.
But they did clean up a lot, especially the ships in space. But then there's things that are just like Jabba in Episode 4. I love Boba Fett, but he didn't need to be there. Jabba doesn't look great. That scene is not needed. And then there's other scenes that I love that he added. So,
in general, I don't like films getting messed with. The exception, I think I like the longer versions of the Lord of the Rings films, but that's like the only one offhand that I can think of where I prefer the longer version versus the theatrical version. I prefer the original Blade Runner, even with the awful voiceover. Yeah, that's what I liked. I thought it was corny. I liked it. I know everybody else, or not everybody else, but a large number of people can't stand it, but whatever.
Well, to me, I give latitude to the creator. If the creator feels that he could have done it better, and many years went by, technology advanced, I can live with it. We're not necessarily all thrilled, but I can live with it. It's different now. Disney is purposely changing and doing things, and it's not good. Anyways, how involved was George with the Genndy Clone Wars? Was he very hands-on? Did he just kind of hand it to Genndy? Do you know anything about that?
I wasn't really part of that. It's just an impression that I'm sure they ran the story by him. I think he was busy. Remind me, when did those come out?
2003, 2005.
Right. I think he was busy, making the movies. The Clone Wars, he was 1,000 times more involved. He was heavily involved with the Clone Wars, working, with Dave Filoni, particularly on the story aspects of it, and probably some editing as well. He was not as involved in the earlier ones. But I'm sure he started off on everything.
No, yeah. And one other quick question on that. It's my understanding they were never really canon. They were more of a fun promotion to get you hyped up and prepared for Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, I don't remember. I believe they were canon at the time. Okay. I think they had to fit in because the idea, I think, was to preview Grievous. Wasn't Grievous previewed?
Yes. Yeah. Well, that was another quick question I was going to ask you: is why such a change in Grievous? He was such a badass in those Clone Wars, and then he just became like not
Well,
very
yeah,
many.
that's where the director of the animated shows and the writers had their idea, and then George had his idea, which was that Grievous was kind of a sickly character who sort of, in some ways, prefigures Darth Vader. Becoming a cyborg is not good for your health. Yeah,
I assume you've seen them, correct?
I saw them at the time. I think I had to see them. They wouldn't. I could not have. I didn't work. We didn't have a lot of tie-in product, but I must have seen them. I don't remember them much.
They're a lot of fun. I have all of them in one video. If you ever want, just let me know and I'll give you the link and you can see them. It's about 3 hours, but you can watch it as however you like in pieces, whatever. Let me know if you ever want to see them. Um, how involved was George, and for how long, in the Clone Wars, the newer ones?
I think he was involved from the get-go. I mean, you could go back and read the Dave Filoni interviews from the original or initial concepts to the climax with Ahsoka. And I mean, I was in the room with him for Clone Wars season 4, and I mean, George came in with the ideas for each show.
So you said the climax with Ahsoka, season 7, this final climax?
No, I mean 6 or 5 or whatever it was.
Okay, before the
Yeah,
changeover.
I have no idea what's going on with the season 7 thing.
So was he at all involved with the new stuff? Because from my understanding, that's all Filoni, that George has nothing to do with any of the new ones.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you yes or no. I know nothing about 7.
Okay.
And I know, except for season 4. I mean, obviously I know the most about season 4, but no, George was, because we were doing Clone Wars related books. George was definitely involved with the Clone Wars in a big way, and he was mentoring Dave Filoni. In some ways, George is like Gene Roddenberry. He created this cast of characters, and then he told different stories with his cast. And sometimes it doesn't quite fit together. I've said this in other podcasts and in books too. My feeling is that Star Wars is really part of a Leaving Home trilogy, which is THX, American Graffiti, Star Wars. Then he did a two-part arc with Empire and Jedi, which is about forgiveness and redemption and things like that, and father-son issues and other things. And then 1, 2, 3 is just sort of the same characters, but not really exactly the same, telling a story about how a corrupt republic becomes a fascist state. And a kid who starts out as a good kid becomes evil, basically. How does that happen? And I see them as 3 distinct stories. And then the Clone Wars, he was more of an issue where he could address certain things that he wanted to talk about in the Star Wars universe, but also related to things that were they are just like Star Trek did. They would take an event that was happening in our world and sort of move it into the Star Wars world and sort of talk about it there. It's the same kind of thing the writers would do in Star Trek, and that was what was happening, in some of the arcs and stories for Clone Wars, and that made it really interesting and really an expression again of George. And some of the episodes worked really well, and some didn't. But he was really willing to take a chance, and he bankrolled that stuff. He always put his money where his mouth is. Those shows were not cheap, and I can't think of something offhand that's similar to a sort of billionaire creator just kind of bankrolling something like that. So they're very interesting.
So just to clarify, you can confirm that he wrote and was a part of seasons 1 through 6, but you're not clear on season 7.
He didn't write the episodes. He'd come in with an idea, and then and this is not. I don't know if this was the case for seasons 1 and 2, but definitely 3, 4, and 5. He'd come in, and there'd be the writers. It's a writer's room, and he'd come in with the basic. Could be like 2 sentences. Obi-Wan has to go undercover to do whatever it is he does in this arc, and then everybody pitch ideas, and you would break it up into acts, and the acts were broken up into scenes. And then the writers would go away and write it, and then George would read the scripts, though, and they'd have to rewrite it, and then they'd be rewritten again, in a sense, when they filmed it, and then in editorial they're rewritten again. And you'd have to ask Dave Filoni, but my impression is that George was participating in editorial most of the time. I don't know about all the time, but a good deal of the time. You'd have to ask Dave to confirm or deny that, but that was my impression. So yeah, those are, it was something that he really, I think he enjoyed doing the animatics in episode 3, and that sort of turned into, Clone Wars, and he'd always been interested in animation. When he originally got a kind of like a fellowship from Warner Brothers because of his student film THX, 1138, the student version. He chose Warner Brothers because he wanted to work with the animators, and then he got there and found out the animation department had just closed. So he'd always been interested in animation, and because he was so bored there, that he called up his friend Howard Kazanjian, who was the first AD at Warner Brothers, and said, I'm bored. What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm working on Finian's Rainbow. Why don't you come over and see what we're doing?" And he came over, and the director of Finian's Rainbow was Francis Ford Coppola, and that's where we met. That's where they met. The three of them kind of met. So, that turned out well. So in a couple of minutes, I got to go. So
no worries. Let's, well, I know you want to talk about your book. So I just want to see if there's like a major question I want to get in real quick. I honestly have a ton of questions. Here's a question that's driving everyone crazy, and I have a feeling you can't answer, but I'm going to ask you. Your NDA, can you tell us how long the NDA is for?
NDAs don't have a set limit. My understanding is that, in general, any NDA, the farther you get from your time at that company, if you start spilling the beans 20 years later, most likely, depending on where you worked, it doesn't really matter that much. I'm not saying that I can ever do that, but that's sort of the general idea. But if you do it 6 months after you leave, you're going to be in hot water.
Right. So, any thoughts on when you would feel comfortable to make that book?
Well, it really wouldn't be me. It would be, lawyers who have, or a publisher and their lawyer who feel really comfortable with what I've written about, and whether they feel like it's, would be something worth doing from a number of points of view, including the quality of the book. So right now I don't really see it ever happening, but you never know. Maybe 10 years from now, but that's just a guesstimate on my part. I would like to one day be able to sort of say what happened. I think there's a small but very interested group of people who would like to know how things went down, and I don't know all the details either. I just saw my slice of life, so to speak. But it was very interesting, and it's sort of an object lesson, and certainly I was intending to show, but it didn't work out too well.
Well, I can tell you that it's more than a few people. I promise you there's at least a million human beings on this planet that want to know what was in that book, regardless of how big or extreme or whatever it was. I can promise you that. There's Star Wars fans worldwide for generations, and many people would love to see that. Let me just mention that a lot of us very much support you and appreciate you. And again, we would love to see that stuff. So when the time comes, reach out in general, but of course you can reach out to me. I'm sure we can crowdfund. I'm sure we can promote. I'm sure that we can help it happen. So as far as publishing, there's nothing better than self-publishing anyways. So don't worry about that. That's going to be the easy part. You need to be comfortable. When you're ready, let me and us know, and you'd be surprised how many people will back that.
Well, that's very kind of you to express your support, and it's nice. It's nice to hear, and I appreciate all the positive feedback I get from the books. I was just doing the best I could. I did not think these books would become as popular, I guess, as they are, but it's a nice feeling, and I'm just glad people are enjoying them still, which I did not anticipate.
That's great. No, a lot of us love Star Wars so much, and as you know, we know all the little canon stuff and side stories, and uh, we also love to see inside of what's going on. As much as we can. We all would love a tour of Lucasfilm or a day with George Lucas, stuff like that. And I think you've expressed that you very much appreciated it and had a good time. But sometimes maybe you guys, because you're doing it every day, you might take it a little bit for granted. Whereas to us, it's like, wow, any little tidbit we can get. So with that said, anytime you want to write me an email, I hope that you had a good time. I hope that you'll come back sometime. I would love to have you again. I still have plenty of questions, although we did a pretty good chunk of my George Lucas questions. I do have some left, and I would like to talk to you a little bit about Disney stuff. So if you ever want to come back, by all means, the door is very wide open. I very much appreciate it. I'm going to ask you one quick funny question, and then I'll let you talk about the book, and then we'll close out. If Kathleen and Pablo are holding you hostage, blink twice. Somebody asked me to ask you that. I won't mention any names, but I just thought it was a great, funny question.
That's a funny question, but
yeah. So, anyways, go ahead, take your time, talk about your book, show it. I also have a image of it if you need me to show, and go ahead.
Can you show it on screen here?
Yeah, if you want to show it on screen, or I can put up the image.
I can't. Well, yeah, you can put it up there. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah,
I don't know how you can see it, but this is a historical fiction novel, historical fiction thriller called All Up. And it's basically supposed to be, I tried very hard to make it an entertaining, page-turning book about the first space age. It comes out on July 14th. It's you can get it as a Kindle book or Apple book, and there'll be an audio book, but it won't be coming out. The audio book will be a little bit later, August or September. And it's a book about what I consider to be, the great adventure of the 20th century, the development of the rocket, which happens during World War II and before World War II with Robert Goddard, and then with the secret German weapons program during World War II, and MI6 is trying to figure out what the Germans are doing. There's a lot of cat and mouse, and a lot of intrigue, and it's all very interesting, I thought. And it was a ton of research behind it. So about 90% of the book, I'd say, is based on what really happened. 10% is either speculation or stuff that can't be proved definitively. But and then it goes into the space race and the Apollo 11 trip to the moon. And I think people who give it a chance and read the first 50 pages will be hooked. I'll go out on a limb and say that. Obviously, no book is for everyone, but I hope people who have read my other books will give it a chance, because it's a behind the scenes book. In the same way that's making a Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Alien were behind the scenes books, this is also a behind the scenes book.
Very cool. Anything else you want to talk about, promote, mention?
Well, I mentioned the Howard Kazanjian book on Twitter today, so I can just say what I said there. We have this book coming out. It's basically on the career of Howard Kazanjian, who, as you all know, produced Return of the Jedi and Raiders, but who knew George, got to know George at USC. Howard was a couple of years ahead of George. And Howard's the one who introduced George to Francis Ford Coppola, and in his own right, Howard had a really interesting career as a first AD, working with Alfred Hitchcock and Sam Peckinpah. and a lot of really interesting people in the sort of twilight years of old Hollywood, and has many, many incredible stories to tell, and has his own insights into Lucasfilm and that period when he was there. And because he's very good friends with Marcia Lucas, she consented to a long form interview. So her interview is integrated throughout the book, and she wrote the foreword to the book. But it's not a coffee table book. It's more of a straight textbook, although there'll be some photos. And it's coming out in spring of next year. And there will be kind of a deluxe version, which we hope to be able to announce the details of in the next couple of months, and people can pre-order it. But I'm pretty excited about it. It was really an interesting book to work on as well. So those are my two plugs.
Cool, very cool. The mods have been sharing the link. Anybody watching the video, if you look in the description of this video, all of Mr. Rinzler's links are there. Also to his website where you can buy the book. I definitely, you mentioned earlier, if someone wanted to do a review, if you would like, I would love for you to send me a preview copy and I'll make a little video review of it. I'll be more than happy. I'm totally into that kind of stuff. I research that kind of stuff. So if you would like to send me a copy, I would love it. And I'll be happy to do a little video review of it. Real quick side question. I'm assuming Operation Paperclip came up in somewhere there.
Oh yeah. Operation Paperclip, it takes place in the book when it took place in real life, starting towards the end of World War II. The Americans were actively on the lookout for the engineers who built the V-2 rocket, and the still very controversial move of bringing these German engineers over to America. But at the time, I put it in the context of the period. I don't try and whitewash it, but the people who were making those decisions had their reasons. And the Russians, what is less known, also carted off a whole bunch of Germans to Soviet Russia to do the same thing. I mean, it was a big deal. Rockets were the future, and it's and not only are the rockets the future, but the whole future of the species is somewhat tied up with rockets. So that's kind of one of the themes running through the book is as we start to explore the solar system, who were the people who created the first rockets, what made them tick, and who are we going to be as now we enter into sort of the second space age with SpaceX and possible mission to Mars. I mean, these are big questions, and at the periphery and underlying a lot of the book are those questions. And so, yeah, Operation Paperclip is definitely a big part of the book.
Cool. Well, again, if you want to send one, I would love to see it, and I will certainly make a video for you and give you a review on it. Okay, I'll make one more quick comment, and I'm going to ask you a tiny favor, and we'll close out. For anyone that came, thank you very much. I hope you guys had a good time. Of course, we could only talk about so much. We have so much time. I have more questions, more things. Hopefully, Jonathan at some time will come back. Please leave comments. Let us know how you like the video. Let your friends and family know. If you perhaps overwhelm the comments of the published video with telling Jonathan he needs to come back, maybe he'll read them and come back. So anyways, very cool to have him here. I wanted to quickly ask you a very side question, but assuming that you had a good time and you felt good, naturally you were in contact with Marcia. So I was going to ask you if you would not mind showing her this. Maybe she would enjoy our conversation, and maybe that will give her the confidence. And if you could put me in touch with her, I would love to have her on. So if you don't mind doing that, if you feel good about it, then there you go. All right, Jonathan, again, a million thank yous. Did you want to say something?
No, I can't. It's obviously that's sort of beyond my kin.
No. You do what you can. I'm just saying you must have had some contact because obviously she's in the book. So, loose conversation, you mention it, whatever. I'm just throwing it out there. I would love to have her. So maybe she'll hear this. If you can do anything about it, I appreciate it. I don't expect anything. Okay. Anything else you want to mention?
No, but thanks for having me. And yeah, it was fun.
Great. I'm glad you had a good time. Truly, it means a lot to us. To us old school Star Wars fans, it means a lot to get any little tidbits. I will stress again, the door is always open. Please come back sometime, whether it's tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. You're always welcome here. And thanks to everybody. I hope you had a good time. And well, thank you, Jonathan, so much for being so gracious. And may the force be with all of you. Take care, guys.
And I'd be happy to be here today.
Great. I appreciate it. And we'll talk about it some more sometime soon. But yeah, thanks. I'm glad you had a good time. And it's been a lot of fun. So thank you so much, Jonathan.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care, guys. Thank you all for coming. And may the force be with you. I'll see you guys soon in a video or live stream. Take care, guys.